My intention was to create the world's worst heroine. But how well did that work out? She's pretty bad, but there's still some sense of purity in her. And she's also noble. Creating the world's worst heroine. That's not an ambition I have previously heard anyone have when creating a character. And yet, that very reason is why Kotaro Uchikoshi had something special on his hands. Zero Escape, as a series rooted in the visual novel genre, is inherently a narrative-focused experience, driven by mysteries engulfed in a dark tone. Thus, the series is populated by these somber themes, all dictated by characters that are willing to delve into these dark spaces. On the other hand, some characters are merely victims of circumstance and were taken to these depths as a result of the decisions of others. No other character represents the personification of the consequences of one's actions more than the series' leading lady and the subject of this quote, Akane Kurashiki. Being one of two characters to make an appearance in all three titles, and the one typically puppeteering the narrative, Akane's character is exceptionally layered and defined by the gray area she so commonly resides in. Consequently, she is a divisive character by nature. According to series director Kotaro Uchikoshi's own words, she is simultaneously bad and pure. Although this is oxymoronic at first glance, I feel it's the perfect encapsulation of her character. Someone who is willing to commit grave deeds all in the pursuit of her objectives. That could easily be a character I'd come to despise. And yet, I keep finding myself drawn to her character more than most other characters in fiction. That quote I pulled earlier. Well, there's more to it. Uchikoshi ends it with, "Her motives are too grand in scale for an ordinary person to ever understand her." Akane was intentionally designed to be an incredibly intricate, morally gray character, which makes analysis of her difficult and open to different interpretations. However, she's one of my favorite characters of all time, and I think that complexity makes for fun discussion, so I'm going to try my best to do her character justice through exploration and an examination of why I believe she is one of the strongest written characters I've seen in all of media. For this analysis, I'll be examining her appearance throughout the entirety of the Zero Escape series, and will mostly be using footage from the PS4 versions of the games. With that being said, let's begin with an examination of the blueprint used to flesh out Akane. The moral ambiguity lurking within Akane is one of her most notable characteristics, and one coded into the foundation of her character. Uchikoshi has noted his use of a personality schemata known as the Enneagram for building characters, as the Zero Escape titles feature 9 primary characters to match the system's 9 personalities. For example, the brash Clover can be labeled as a 6, or the Loyalist, and the passionate Santa falls under 7, or the Enthusiast. Akane can be classified as a 9, which is extremely fitting as her number embodies her debut game's core, 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors, or 999, and is the number at the end of it all. Nevertheless, that's also because of its attributed personality, the Peacemaker. According to this test, Peacemakers are identified by their desire for harmony and comfortability, as well as their inclination to avoid conflict. While these pure traits can be seen in her character, the opposites, which tend to be more sinister, also compose her character, like two halves constantly in conflict. However, she wasn't always like this, and was nurtured through tragedy after tragedy. Although not depicted during the course of the game, the events leading to 999's gigantic incident are crucial to understanding the base Peacemaker personality of Akane and the eventual formation of her conniving half. Akane's childhood was a long series of unfortunate events, starting with the death of her parents, which left her and her brother Aoi to fend for themselves. Despite these hardships, Akane lived happily with her brother and retained her positive outlook on life. She then went to school, dealt with problems of isolation and the other trials and tribulations that came with it. Yet, she eventually became steadfast friends with Junpei, and this very connection would change the course of her life in more ways than she could have possibly anticipated. Over the course of years, the two kids would strengthen their friendship through attending festivals, playing games, and each sharing the responsibility of tending to the class rabbits. This particular event would cement itself in Akane's mind for decades to come, both as a positive memory of her time with Junpei, but also one acting as the original sin which planted seeds of doubt regarding the good of humankind. Akane came one day to find that the rabbits had been killed, but without a trace of the culprits. Due to the lie she was fed about her parents' death and her young age, Akane might have not been able to fully comprehend that situation, so this would act as the first instance of direct human cruelty she experienced. Junpei and her would then spend the entire summer on guard, waiting for the killer, which strengthened their relationship further. Eventually, the 8th graders responsible for the slaughter appeared, and Junpei fought them, only to get beat into a pulp. After dealing with the problem, Junpei gave her a doll as a memento to remember him, as they sat watching the sunset from atop the hill. A moment she, as well as I, would cling to. Although there were a handful of sad moments littered throughout her childhood, Akane lived happily and fought back on her youth fondly. Yet, at this point, her life would be wrenched from her control. Sometime later, Akane and Aoi would be kidnapped by a company named Cradle Pharmaceutical, alongside 16 other children, and forced to compete in the first nonary game, all in the attempt by the company to test the limits of morphogenetic fields. These children would be sent to 2 different facilities based on their ability to receive or transfer information across these fields, and subjected to a series of puzzles, all in search of the exit behind a series of marked doors. However, Akane was placed in the wrong building and had the number 5 bracelet placed onto her wrist, the same one Junpei would wear 9 years later. With the help of a detective later codenamed Seven, the kids were on the verge of escape, but Akane misplaced the doll given to her by Junpei, an object that symbolizes her close friend and the time they spent together, and she went back to grab it. Doing so would prove to be a fatal mistake, as the CEO of Cradle Pharmaceutical and the head of the game, Gentaro Hongo, later known as Ace, would throw her into the incinerator to finish one last puzzle at the cost of her life. Akane unfortunately died that day, but simultaneously didn't. In some existences, Akane was burnt to cinders, leaving her brother to mourn. In others, an intervening force like Deus Ex Machina saved her life and allowed her to escape. Yet, fate has a cruel way of working, and Akane would be required to pursue a life that would stabilize her own existence in this world. The reason I find it necessary to summarize Akane's backstory is more than just simply using the foundation provided to you to provide strong analysis, but also that her sullen demeanor was not something that grew inorganically within the narrative, but was rather a product of countless injustices at the hands of humanity's worst. Due to her capture by Cradle Pharmaceutical, Akane was now forced to spend years of her life pursuing avenues that would allow for her to even exist. The Peacemaker was forced to become an observer as the now hardened side of her stepped in to do what was needed. And thus, we come to the main event of 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors. Engulfed in the depths of a shadowy labyrinth harboring a dark history, 999 serves as the introduction to the character of Akane and all the complexity behind her as well. Every interaction between her and the main party seems to reinforce that not a day has passed, and she's still the sweet girl that Junpei came to befriend all those years ago. A quirky personality, opposes the notion of leaving someone behind, spews random tidbits of information, all alongside her past ties to Junpei. She brings a liveliness to the party that enables Junpei, and perhaps the player, to drop their guard. I've referenced Akane's questionable actions that blur her status as a heroine, but what exactly are they? Well, let's just start with kidnapping 9 unwilling participants and forcing them into a death game that would either mentally scar them or end with their guts coating the wall. Okay, that last part was only a privilege granted to a select few, but essentially the second nonary game was run by Akane and her brother as a means to fulfill the requirements set by fate, and to continue her existence by putting Junpei in the right position to contact Akane in the first nonary game 9 years prior. Although the game was designed after the first incarnation where all 9 players in the respective facility had the potential to escape, in her adaptation, Akane had no reservations concerning the deaths of a few key individuals. In 999, Akane has fevers spring up out of seemingly nowhere, but the truth is that these are guides telling the player that they are choosing the wrong path. Akane's fevers indicate that she is close to incineration, so the path toward the true ending lacks any occurrences, save for one, which is the death of the 9th man. Due to the role that fevers play in each of the timelines, one could theorize that Akane never did desire for the 9th man to die in such a way, but the possibility was accounted for as indicated by the fact that he was one of the lucky few, alongside his Cradle Pharmaceutical co-workers, who actually had a bomb planted in them. All of these individuals were responsible for the trauma she and Aoi experienced 9 years earlier, and makes the second Nonary game serve two primary functions: to ensure her existence in the present, and to get revenge on the high-ranking officers at Cradle Pharmaceutical. The fact that she was able to sell that much emotion in her acting following the ninth man's death and Ace being left behind just adds to her duplicity. Furthermore, she doesn't get a fever when Cradle's Nijisaki dies a similar fate behind door number 3, showing a further lack of remorse. I feel one could justify a different interpretation of Akane's view on murder, and no matter what that might look like, it directly reflects on Akane's character. Yet, I've always viewed her as I've just explained, someone who might not want to kill someone, but wouldn't think again if she knew it guaranteed her the highest chance of success, or was a necessity to accomplish her goals. Uchikoshi echoes this very sentiment with this quote: "She's the sort of woman who will do whatever it takes to achieve her goals. Even though she seems like a nice girl, she's always plotting rather cold things. She'd easily kill someone if she needed to. Her personality is a result of what happened to her 9 years before." With all of this being said, I think it's logical to conclude that she still values life, especially those of the innocent, as it is a principle that guides her future actions in the following volumes. However, the events spurred on by Ace's sin forced her out of that shell of naivety she inhabited for so long. What's more, she has been able to view the world of the future through Junpei's eyes, which certainly held benefits, such as her ability to fund the whole excursion through taking advantage of the stock market. But it also had other effects. Akane had to have seen people die countless times across the numerous histories, some by her own actions, which likely desensitized her to such violence. Being able to view life in such a way that others are not able to might have also detached her from what other people would normally be able to experience. In order to accomplish her goals, she would have to bear witness to numerous failures of the second Nonary game, and push through no matter what happened. The death of the rabbits might have acted as her first taste of human cruelty, but the first Nonary game was the trigger that warped her perception on life and created this multifaceted character I love. My favorite quote from Akane in 999 and maybe the entire series comes from the grand reveal. A voice in your head, a close friend inhabiting your bottom screen who has been there the entire journey. Now, who am I? I am I. The 9th letter of the alphabet, but I'm also 0. No, that's not true. I'm not really 0. Not yet. Perhaps you could say I'm less than 0. 0 is my future. In 9 years, I will be 0. It's such a haunting, stunning quote serving such a stark contrast to the playful, human persona of Akane on display until this climax. The truth is that Akane, as a transmitter and someone who has control of her abilities, has more knowledge than anyone else of this game's events and the world itself. Virtue's Last Reward expands on this concept, but Akane in some respects has surpassed the limits of humankind. The language employed in this monologue strikes me as shocking in the moment and fitting to her in hindsight. Additionally, this all plays into one of my favorite aspects regarding 999's presentation, which is how it never explicitly shows the darker side of Akane. Near its conclusion, Junpei realizes that Akane created this game as a method of preserving her existence in the present. Yet, she's not physically there during this reveal, nor does the language used seem to indicate any semblance of malice. Instead, the entire game acts as a character-building device, as the Nonary game was planned out by her and her brother Aoi. By utilizing the DS's bottom screen for all of her text and her perception of the events, and then putting an emphasis on the text placement on the bottom screen in the finale, the player comes to realize she has been with us all this time, acting as the narrator of our events and the diegetic guide for Junpei within this world. The Nonary game, as a scrupulous and horrifying experience, acts as an extension of who Akane is. Alternatively, Akane can be viewed as a personified version of everything this Nonary game embodies, something cold and mysterious, but with intent. The two perfectly complement each other. Furthermore, as I said, Akane factored in the possibility that people would die on failed alternate timelines. Yet the Nonary game at its base was designed to have all 9 individuals survive. So, if it is symbolic of her, then there resides in her a sense of humanity and mercy amidst all the precise machinations. I've also spoken on this in previous videos, but Morphogenetic Sorrow is a spectacular melody with a melancholic air to it, and seems to not only serve as the series' main theme, but specifically Akane and Junpei's theme through its numerous appearances across the series. Its utilization in the game's final puzzle and the build-up toward it plays a monumental role in its effectiveness and the player's ability to sympathize with Akane. This character moment is absolutely brilliant, so much so that I actually focused on it as well as an analysis of 999's blending of metafiction and immersion in my thesis paper. Without this moment and all of the variables composing it, I don't believe 999's narrative payoff and the character of Akane would be as fantastic as they are. Ultimately, Uchikoshi wrote Akane as a mastermind masquerading as the wholesome Peacemaker, and 999 spends a majority of its narrative convincing the player of this deception, only for it to hit the player in a well-executed emotional subversion of the girl-next-door archetype commonly found on display in the genre. Although Akane and Aoi fled the facility without a trace at the game's conclusion, I found myself believing that Junpei and the others eventually found them, and their story ended happily. However, Uchikoshi had much different plans, as when asked if Junpei ever caught up, he responded Junpei would spend the rest of his life chasing after her. An absolute gut punch of an answer that would pave the way for the series' future and Akane's development. If 999 utilizes the pure half of Akane's personality that falls more in line with the girl-next-door archetype in order to lure the player into a false sense of security, then Virtue's Last Reward is concerned with shattering that perception with the Machiavellian depiction of her. Just like 999's Nonary game, the Ambidex game was created to serve a greater purpose than simply someone's entertainment. Shortly after the events of the first volume in the year 2028, a deadly virus named Radical 6 would consume the planet, and the chain reaction would result in the death of 6 billion people. The Ambidex game was devised to strengthen the morphic abilities of protagonists Sigma and Phi to prevent this outbreak, and Akane, just like previously, plays a massive part in running the show. Once again, a high number of deaths across several timelines occurs, all for the sake of completing this objective, which builds upon the morally gray foundation flashed in 999. Yet, Akane's presence in Virtue's Last Reward isn't made immediately apparent, as the identity of the old lady is only discovered during the final hours. Nevertheless, her fingerprint can be traced to several elements, which all showcase Akane's childhood. For starters, the sadistic, joke-cracking Zero the Third is inherently linked to Akane, and not just from her role as one of his parents. Personality-wise, they share almost nothing in common, but regarding his design, that's a different story. Akane has a deep connection to the rabbits from her childhood, which Junpei and her were assigned to look over. It's an experience she heavily treasured, and when events took a turn for the worse with the rabbit's murder, began to change her perspective on humanity. So, designing an AI crucial to her plan in the shape of a rabbit and serving as its caretaker feels like a subtle attempt by Akane to recollect those cherished memories from her youth. Furthermore, the password necessary to activate the one-headed lion computer at the game's finale is Jumpy Doll, or Grape Doll in the Japanese version, both names which reference the present Junpei gave to Akane before she transferred schools. Finally, we have the ring seen on her finger, which Junpei had given to her following his proposal in the Mars mission test site. All three of these occurrences are smaller details within the narrative meant to illustrate the remaining sympathetic, kind-hearted woman buried within a person weighed down by tending to responsibilities for so long. Additional proof of her compassion can be seen in Kei's backstory, where he directly tells Sigma that Akane graced the moon base with a warm presence, one that made him feel comfortable, despite the fact that she knew she would have to die for her cause the minute she stepped into that facility. The real kicker is how she so longed to live a life she wanted with the person she cared for most, but couldn't happily do that with how fate would unwind. 999 and Virtue's Last Reward's depictions of Akane beautifully juxtapose each other as a result of all this. 999 highlights the sweeter side of Akane, while hinting at her devious goals, sowing seeds of doubt into the player about who she really is once the credits roll. Virtue/Reward, on the other hand, puts that serious persona in the spotlight, but uses small details or character interactions to shed light on that warm presence dimly lit within her. One of my favorite aspects about Akane's portrayal throughout the series, and most evidently in Virtue/Reward, is how we get to see Akane in multiple stages in her life. This is something I've always appreciated about characters like Goku, as the audience can witness what aspects of their personality developed, changed, or how hardships earlier in life influenced their perspective on matters as an adult or elderly person. Akane transforms from an optimistic, cheerful kid all the way to an elderly woman focused on the mission with no time for personal ambitions. What is particularly tragic is how that mastermind persona grows and consumes her the older she gets. Since 999 never explicitly shows the more cunning side of Akane, Virtue/Reward is the player's first exposure to this side in person, and is the only side of her on display, showcasing someone who dreams life played out differently, but realizes they must cast those feelings aside for the greater good. Is it admirable that someone is willing to sacrifice their own well-being for the sake of the world? For sure. However, it's simultaneously heartbreaking to realize that Akane never initially chose this life, and that choice was stripped from her by Ace. Virtue/Reward takes advantage of the player's desire to see her receive closure in several key moments, including her reason for doing all of this in Kei's backstory, her request for Tenmyoji to wait just a bit longer in room Q, and Tenmyoji's final words on Akane as her not being the same woman he used to know. This adds to a factor I greatly appreciate about Akane's character, which is her agency. Junpei means a lot to her as a character, being a key component in why she does everything she does. However, he's not the only variable, nor is her dialogue strictly about him. Instead, Junpei and Akane stand on their own as fully realized characters that work so effectively because their connection is organically written into the narrative on an emotional and morphic level. When Akane and Junpei finally get to see each other in room Q, the game once again uses morphogenetic sorrow to build a mental bridge for the player between this moment and the last time it was used, the incinerator from 999. The consistent variables? Akane and Junpei. It's emotionally brutal, and although Virtue/Reward might be visually lighter than 999 with its metallic walls, color-coded doors, and lower emphasis on shadows, the heavy tone seeps into the passionate character moments. And when Tenmyoji declares the Akane Kurashiki he knows doesn't exist anymore, that's the final page in this long, sad story. Sigma and Tenmyoji both remark on Akane's bizarre status in different ways. Sigma utilizes the analogy of the termite mound to posit someone like her as practically otherworldly with her vast knowledge gathered over countless timelines, almost as if she is a human staring down at a termite mound. But, just like in this analogy, the human is completely detached from the termites, unable to properly relate to them or connect with them. And while this might be an exaggeration since Akane does desire to be with Junpei, it offers clarity as to how Junpei doesn't see her as the Akane he came to love. Akane's portrayal in Virtue/Reward is an incredibly tough pill to swallow, but I believe a logical continuation of her arc that luckily only serves as a possibility, a warning of what could happen instead of the final outcome. Zero Time Dilemma, the final entry in the saga as well as the most contentious one, takes us into the past from Virtue/Reward in an attempt to stop the release of Radical 6 into the general public. Characters both new and old make an appearance, and the final result is a mixed bag when it comes to its cast. Akane wholly embodies this design philosophy, as I would consider this to be her weakest incarnation. But it's still composed of strong character moments. Fundamentally, this result comes down to her role within the story. Zero Time Dilemma's decision game sees 9 individuals trapped in an underground facility as they struggle through a series of puzzles and choices in hopes of escaping, something only granted for the death of 6 individuals. Along with the MVP that is Carlos, Akane and Junpei constitute C-Team, which leads to a healthy number of interactions between the two. In 999, Akane was Zero and fashioned the second Nonary game. In Virtue/Reward, she was a key component behind the creation and progression of the Ambidex game. The core of Akane's character has always been that of a sweet woman buried under the superego of a duplicitous, scheming puppet master who has the will to accomplish her goals whatever that requires. If she has to push that innocent, cheerful persona from her youth to the forefront in order to cast suspicion off her, she will do it. If she must sacrifice her life and those of others in multiple timelines to ensure a future that meets her agenda, she's also going to do that. There is some semblance of that kind-hearted girl still in her, but even according to her own words in Zero Time Dilemma, that determined person is just who she is. A personality crafted from hardship and circumstance. So, why does this create an issue with Zero Time Dilemma's rendition of the character? Well, it's because this is the first time Akane is not pulling the strings in some capacity, and she's unfortunately stripped of what I'd consider to be the most interesting part of her character. To my Metal Gear fans out there, it echoes Revolver Ocelot's involvement in the Phantom Pain to me. A great character that just doesn't get the shine nearly as much as the others because they're taking a back seat. Despite her diminished amount of control, Zero Time Dilemma does offer a viewpoint of Akane not previously exhibited. 999 showed the innocent side, Virtue/Reward portrayed the one who had gone too far, but Zero Time Dilemma depicts an Akane juggling both sides and balancing on the fine line of fate. At this point in life, Akane has very little to hide compared to her previous incarnations, and her two objectives are to stop the spread of Radical 6 and pull Junpei out of the depths, as she feels responsible for his suffering over the past year of searching for her. As a result, we see the kind-hearted woman and self-proclaimed queen of random knowledge return from 999, revealing that it wasn't all a complete facade. Furthermore, we see her determined nature on display when her objectives are compromised. Because Akane's fate lies in the balance based off of the player's decisions in this game, there's a lot of pressure to avoid having her go down this sad path that we've seen in Virtue/Reward. My last note on Zero Time Dilemma is that, although I previously discussed the significance that the time with the rabbits had on her life, I do find that the story beat is a little overplayed in this game. While it was the most influential childhood memory in the bond these two share, numerous other events kindled that flame, and focusing on that one particular span of time deprives their relationship of the story depth it actually has. Akane and Junpei just feel a bit off in terms of their appearance in Zero Time Dilemma. Regardless, there are great moments for the two of them, such as Junpei's promise to remember Akane at the end of Circle of Fate, and his proposal, a moment that would give more depth to her character and attire in Virtue/Reward. But at the end of the day, even if we haven't closed the book on Akane's character, Akane does end in a happier place, and that, as a player, met what I wanted for so long. It's hard to nail it down to a very precise reason why I love Akane's character so much, and there was no way I could address every aspect of her character. It's just how all the elements composing her come together. This girl with an exceptionally goofy, quirky personality who possesses a wealth of knowledge, yet can easily drop that demeanor in favor of a serious, driven attitude if need be. She's not completely devoid of life and energy, nor is she blissfully ignorant. Both of these moods act as the two sides to the coin that is Akane. Additionally, her nature isn't something that is crafted spontaneously in the name of plot convenience, but rather is meticulously developed over the entire series in such a way that you can understand and personally sympathize with her character. Someone who must abandon or put on hold all of their personal desires in multiple lifetimes for the sake of mankind and the chance that one day she can live a happy life with the person she cares about most. The tragic character is one of, if not my favorite character archetype in all of storytelling, and I think Akane absolutely nails it. And although the payoff to her dream is only present via a small snippet in Zero Time Dilemma's post-game files, I can't put into words how happy that made me seeing all her struggles and efforts finally mean something, and giving some form of closure to a cliffhanger left nearly 6 years earlier. Akane Kurashiki might be the world's worst heroine, but she's also one of the greatest characters I've ever seen. Hello there everybody, welcome to the end of the video and thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis of Akane, one of my favorite characters of all time, please consider leaving a like on this video and subscribing to the channel. It has been far too long since my last Zero Escape analysis and I apologize for that, but this was a video I wanted to make sure I did right. Akane, like I have said so many times, is one of my favorite characters in my top 5. And I knew that if I were to do this video, it had to be over the whole series, and I wanted it to be something that I was proud of at the end of the day, so I hope you enjoyed it. Some people might be wondering what happened to the Dramatis Personae titling that came with these character analyses, and I just feel that it limited me in some respects by sticking to that singular format, and also just in terms of branding, it was a lot harder to do. So I'm still planning to do character analyses, but probably just not under that titling anymore. Anyways, thank you guys, as always, for the support and for watching the videos. I hope life is treating you well, whether you're enjoying the summer, or working, or whatever it may be. And with that, until next time.